Welcome to HP Fanfiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. Harry gestured to him to continue with a frown. If the headmaster wanted to put himself in danger, who was he to argue with the fool? They continued in companionable silence until Dumbledore came to a stop, his wand lit and aloft, a wand that looked very familiar to what Cassie had described. Before he could broach the subject, Dumbledore stepped to the side, pointing towards something stretching across the floor. It took Harry a moment to realize what it was, not having seen one so large before. He had been impressed when Mira had shed one over 2 meters long. This, however, was not even comparable. It had to be close to 60 feet. Quite the creature, Dumbledore mused aloud. To be this size, Slytherin himself must have brought it here. Harry nodded. The basilisks he had read about had been no longer than 30 feet in length. The one in the chamber would dwarf them easily and would be considerably more dangerous. He released a deep breath, debating whether it would be worth it. Eventually he knew he would have to go into the chamber regardless of his feelings. He couldn't risk one of Tom's Horcruxes remaining, and it was the most credible place he would find one. He would much rather do so knowing he had someone as competent as Dumbledore with him, loath to admit it as he was. We should keep going, he decided. Just stay alert. The grip around his wand tightened as he continued to follow the old man, both much more cautious in their steps, the only sound coming from the occasional bone splintering as an errant one was stood on. Eventually they came upon a large door sealed by a lock in the middle made up of several snakes. Once again Harry took control of the situation by running his hand over one of the serpents. The magic here was stronger, the caster finding no need to conceal their presence. It was intoxicating, yet still held a familiarity of Tom and even his own now that it stood more boldly. "Open," he hissed again, quickly turning up against the wall to avoid anything inside, being able to see him. Dumbledore did the same, and the duo waited long after the clanking of the door had faded into distant echoes, before Dumbledore conjured a small mirror and angled it into the room. "It is clear," he whispered. Harry stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the area carefully, and a spell dying on his lips as he realized the serpents within were made of stone. They lined a long walkway, leading to an enormous carving of a man's face surrounded by a large pool of water. "Fascinating," Dumbledore whispered. Harry ignored the headmaster and began making his way towards the carving, his senses on high alert. There was much less magic to be felt within the room than he imagined, only very faint traces that Tom had left behind during his visits. Worse yet, there was nothing that felt even closely like what the Horcruxes gave off. And as he rounded the pool, he could conclude that there was not one close by unless it was within a hidden room. Waving his wand carefully, he checked the carving, breathing a sigh of relief once he had finished his spell work. "There's nothing here other than something living inside that," he explained, pointing to the carving. "The basilisk," Dumbledore surmised. "Yeah, but it can't come out unless it is called upon. A protection, I'd believe, was put in place by Salazar rather than Tom." "Indeed," Dumbledore replied sagely. "Is there anything else you can feel?" "Not much," Harry admitted. "There's some residual magic that feels more like Tom than Slytherin, but nothing like the Horcruxes. If there was one here, I'd be able to feel it." Dumbledore sighed. "Just as I expected. The diary would have been created when Tom was still a pupil at school. If any would be housed here, it would have been that. He only visited on one other occasion and left the grounds before he would have had time to come here. Of that I am certain." "When?" Harry asked curiously. "A few years after he graduated, he came inquiring about the role of defense against the dark arts professor. As you can understand, I was not thrilled with the idea of having him back within these walls. Tom did not take it well, but he left immediately after our meeting." "So it isn't here," Harry huffed. "No, but it was the best idea we had," Dumbledore comforted. "There are very few places known within the castle where Tom would feel safe hiding a piece of his soul. It would be very risky, particularly with me here." "It would be foolish," Harry muttered, "but a risk he would take if he felt he could get away with it. You have another idea? Harry shook his head. No, but being down here isn't the best place to think, he pointed out. Then we shall return to my office. I dare say it is much more pleasant. Harry gave a final look around the chamber as he exited, disappointed by the lack of anything. Seemingly it only served as a place for Salazar to hide his monster. If there was anything more down here, it had not made itself known. Even if the faintest trace existed, he would have found it. Instead of lamenting on what was not to be, he followed the headmaster and the pair reached the tunnel entrance after another lengthy walk. Well, it looks like we have a climb ahead of us, Harry grumbled, the disappointment of the evening leaving him unmotivated for such. Fear not, Harry, I do have a trick or two that have proven to be useful in the past. If you would kindly take my sleeve. Harry did so and choked as he was consumed by a sudden heat and flash of light. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in the office. The pair had left some time ago, still holding on to Dumbledore's arm. The man simply grinned and stroked the plumage of his familiar, who chirped contentedly. Useful, Harry commented. Why couldn't he have taken us in? Dumbledore chuckled. Phoenixes are rather spectacular creatures, Harry, but they also have their limits. Fawkes was only able to enter the chamber because I was in there, his bond with myself much stronger than what remains of the wards. Forgive me for being so literal, but 1,000-year-old wards are not strong unless they are maintained regularly. The problem those ones posed was little more than a language barrier. That was their greatest asset. Makes sense, Harry agreed. It doesn't bring us any closer to where the Horcrux is. It does not, Dumbledore muttered. Well, instead of gallivanting off to Merlin knows where, why don't you fools speak to Rowena's daughter? She does reside within these walls, the Hat called mockingly. Dumbledore deflated and shook his head. Could you not have mentioned this before we left? I did try. You two were intent on being fools, so I allowed it. What more do you want from me, Albus? I'm a bloody hat. The garment fell silent once again, and Dumbledore took a seat behind his desk, tugging his beard as he pondered their predicament. It was rumored that Helena stole her mother's diadem and fled as a young woman. She returned and was disowned by Rowena on her deathbed. Who is her daughter? Forgive me, Harry. It can only be one lady I have come across on a few occasions. She is known affectionately as the Grey Lady, the ghost of Ravenclaw Tower. How would Tom have found out who she was? Tom, as I'm sure you are aware, is a rather charming and charismatic man. Well, he was as a young man. Such tact is no longer needed, any longer when so many fear him so. So he charmed a ghost? Harry asked disbelievingly. In my experience, even those long past seek redemption. Who easier to manipulate than a woman desperate to redeem herself in the eyes of her mother? If Tom promised her he would return it, she could have been convinced to let him know where it was. Harry conceded. Then, let us waste no more time, Harry. She often frequents the astronomy tower in the evening. It was a place very dear to her mother. Again Harry found himself following the man through the corridors of the castle, this time their destination much easier to reach and unlikely to house anything so dangerous as a basilisk. He had been pleased he had managed to avoid the climb out of the chamber, but the number of stairs in the castle and leading up the tower more than made up for it. The first indication they had arrived came as Dumbledore pushed open a door and a cool breeze washed over him. Even during the summer, Scottish nights had a briskness to them. Good evening, my lady. I was hoping you would be able to assist myself and my companion, Dumbledore's voice sounded. Harry stepped from behind the man and found himself facing the ghost of a young woman. Even in death, she was hauntingly beautiful, and in life would undoubtedly have been more so. Her long black hair was plaited down her back, and the dress she wore white and form-fitting. The thing that detracted from her beauty was the look of mourning she wore that seemed a permanent fixture. Even in death, her eyes were longing, searching for something likely to never be found. It is my duty to serve you, Headmaster, she replied, her eyes flickering to Harry and widening slightly. I wish to discuss with you a certain student that may have happened across you several decades ago. One, Tom Riddle. The look of mourning was replaced with one of fury as the woman turned her attention back to Dumbledore. Do not speak of him, she hissed. She began sobbing and turned away, slumping over the parapet of the tower. My lady, I did not wish to upset you, merely right any wrong he had done. None can right what he did to my mother's crown. Such desecration cannot be undone. Now be gone. I will speak of it no further." With her final words spoken, she turned away once more and gazed towards the night sky. Dumbledore looked to Harry almost pleadingly, and the younger man stepped forward, resting his arms atop the rough stone. "It can be fixed," he began, and the woman's head turned towards him. "I know it can be fixed because I have removed his taint from other things, even from myself. I housed a part of his soul for a number of years before I was healed." The young woman looked at him hopefully, and he reached out, placing his hand over hers, ignoring the icy feel of her touch. "I'm going to kill him, Helena. To be able to do it, I need to know where it is hidden." The woman met his stare and swallowed, after it felt though she had seen into his soul. "You're very much like him, but different. There's a warmth in you that he never had," she whispered, and sighed before turning away, her eyes fixed once more towards the stars above. "It is in the castle, in the room of hidden things. He took great glee in showing me what he had done to it." "Thank you, my lady," Harry returned with a bow. "Thank me by fixing what he did and return my mother's crown to the school where it belongs." Harry nodded before he walked back to Dumbledore, the man waiting patiently several feet away. "Do you know where the room of hidden things is?" he asked. Dumbledore frowned, but nodded after a moment. "Another lesser-known secret of the castle. Worry not, I believe this one will be much easier to locate," Harry, the older man, assured him as they descended from the tower and arrived on the 7th floor. "This way." Harry followed the man into a corridor that had no doors, the sconces on the wall not even being lit. "This part of the castle is seldom visited. I found myself here once when I taught Transfiguration. I had gotten lost and was in need of a chamber pot. Lo and behold, this corridor provided exactly what I needed." "And you think it could provide a place for hiding things?" "Much, much more, I suspect," Dumbledore replied excitedly, "but certainly a place to hide something." "Well, how do we find it?" "I remember pacing back and forth along this very wall, my needs very much occupying my mind. After a while a door appeared, and inside I found all manner of chamber pots, enough for any need to be met. When I left, the room vanished, and I have yet to find it again since. Perhaps you will be more fortunate in locating the elusive room." With a shrug, Harry began pacing up and down the corridor, his thoughts set on locating the room of hidden things, as named by Helena Ravenclaw. He was on the verge of considering it a failure, when to his right, a large oak door appeared in the wall. For a moment he was surprised it had worked, though he shouldn't have been. In his admittedly few years on this planet, he had seen many wondrous things. A room hidden by wards was quite tame, in comparison. Any notion of this merely being a hidden room within the castle vanished, as he pushed open the door and was greeted by the sight of a room larger than even the Great Hall could be. It was then that he realized that this was more than just another room, this was something else altogether. "How?" he asked dumbly. Dumbledore shook his head. "Sometimes, Harry, the beauty is not knowing all the answers. I believe that this room is one of those things where we should ask no questions but marvel at it for what it is." Harry nodded his agreement. Undoubtedly, there was some very complex magic at work here. If what Dumbledore had said was true, then it was likely this room could become almost anything one could wish for. For, amazing as it was, it could be equally dangerous if left unchecked. He had no doubt that Dumbledore would be investigating the room to ensure it posed no danger to the students. "I think we have a lot of work to do," he mused aloud as the duo crossed the threshold. For how big the room had proven to be, it was almost full to the brim with an assortment of items ranging from books and portraits to full suits of armor and various weapons. "Perhaps, but I believe you will be much quicker locating it if it is indeed here," Dumbledore replied optimistically. "We'd better get to it," Harry sighed, leading a path through the debris and accumulated wares dating back to Merlin only knew. The pair worked in silence, stopping occasionally to investigate something that caught their attention. Amongst a pile of books, Harry located some rare tomes that even the Black Library was missing, and so he shrunk and pocketed them unapologetically along with some other books that seemed to have been penned by hand. I must ensure the students do not come across this," Dumbledore whispered as he levitated a shriveled and mummified corpse from a pile of discarded robes. "What an unpleasant death for this poor soul." "I think this whole room should be condemned," Harry added. "There are things here that even my family would not involve themselves in." Dumbledore nodded severely. "I will dispose of those things. Anything valuable can be sold and added to the school fund. Of course, anything you come across that would be useful and not illegal is yours as my co-founder." Harry nodded appreciatively, surprised by the generosity of the man. It was a strange feeling coexisting with him, even if it were only temporary and in the interest of putting an end to Tom. Were it not for their shared foe, Harry would likely refuse to be in the same room as the headmaster, even for all the gold in Gringotts. Suddenly he stopped proceeding as a familiar magic washed over his periphery for a split second. Closing his eyes, he felt for it again and it brushed over his own, almost willing him to find it. "It's here," he announced, drawing his wand and slowly making his way in the direction of what he had come to know well. Dumbledore said nothing, but Harry could feel him following a few paces behind, his own wand in hand. He had to focus on the magic as it was not so close, but it became stronger. The further into the room he moved, as it had in the gaunt home, the feeling soon became overwhelming and it pulsed against his own magic in an almost welcoming rhythm. Harry pushed that thought aside as his eyes were drawn to stone bust of a warlock of which a rather old and dated diadem was perched upon the head. "There," he said, pointing to the object with his wand. "Indeed," Dumbledore whispered. "I can feel his magic." Carefully, Harry levitated the tiara from the head and levitated it a few feet in front of himself and the headmaster. "There doesn't seem to be any other curses on it, but I wouldn't recommend touching it just to be safe." Dumbledore nodded as he conjured an ornate box lined with a black glassy substance. "Obsidian," he explained. "It should be able to house it until the taint can be removed. It would be a shame to destroy such an important part of the school's history." With his decision made, he sealed the box with an intricate locking charm before pulling it out of the air and handing it to Harry, who looked at him in confusion. "As a favor to the school, I would ask that you have the Horcrux removed so that it may be as it was intended." Harry nodded before shrinking the box and pocketing it. A trip to Egypt was required to deal with the cup already. Taking the diadem was not an imposition. Despite his feelings about Britain, Hogwarts had housed and educated generations of his family on both sides. Returning a piece of the founding history was the least he could do. "Only the snake left," he reminded the older man. Dumbledore smiled as he nodded, his eyes twinkling behind his spectacles. "It is my final wish to see the end of Voldemort. When done, perhaps I can rest a little easier." "You mean Tom?" Dumbledore shook his head. "To me, he will always be Tom, the same boy I brought into our world. The Tom I knew then had his issues, but I never could have guessed he would become what he has. No, Harry, Tom died many, many years ago when he murdered his own kin and Voldemort was born." "You think of them as two different people," Harry stated. "Forgive me, Harry, but I like to look for the best in all. Tom was troubled, had tendencies developed through years of hardship. There is no good in Voldemort, not even I am so blind to believe otherwise. When I hear him speak, I hear Tom's voice, but his actions do not mimic those of the boy. He was not made a prefect, nor head boy for no reason during his time here. He was harsh when needed, but merciful also. I mourn the boy I knew even if I wasn't fond of him." For the first time, Harry began to understand Dumbledore, his outlook on life, perhaps having caused many a problem, but deep down he believed in the best people had to offer. He could only imagine the amount of times he had been disappointed throughout his life by Tom and others he had come across. "What about Grindelwald?" Dumbledore's eyes filled with sadness at the mention of the name. "Gellert was my friend, the both of us two very ambitious fools. My ambition died with my sister and his only grew along with his bitterness. I tried all I could to avoid the inevitable. In the end he died by wand because I did nothing to curb his actions. The same as with Tom. Perhaps I can be blamed for them both to an extent, or perhaps they would have become what they were in the end without me. I see it as my duty to put an end to Voldemort as I did Gellert all those decades ago, as loath as I am to do it. But it will be me killing Tom, Harry pointed out. As is your right, Harry. He has caused you more pain than any, me included. I will never ask for your forgiveness, as I never have, Gellert or Tom. It is I that carry the burden of my mistakes, and they are cumbersome. I can only hope that when it is time to take the next great adventure, they weigh me down much less. Harry could only nod, not wanting to discuss the mistakes the man had made, many as they were where he was concerned. And what about the Elder Wand? Do you intend to take that with you? A look of shock replaced the sadness of the old man, and he chuckled after a moment as he drew the wand once more. It was only a matter of time before somebody figured it out. I was hoping that I would be long past by then, and the wand with me. It too is a heavy burden to carry, one in which the cons outweigh the pros. As I'm sure you worked out, Gellert had it in his possession the day I defeated him. I have come to learn that the wand is not all the legend told. It is a wand of great power, make no mistake, but it is not infallible, much like myself. I carry it more of a reminder that I too am prone to mistakes, though usually much bigger than the average person. So why carry it? You could have disposed of it any time. I could, but then I would spend my days worrying whom it was would come upon it next and what they would do with it. As I said, it is not infallible but still an exceptionally powerful wand. He ran a finger across the length lovingly, his eyes glazing over as he lost himself in memories past. And it is the only thing you have left of him, Harry pointed out, pulling the headmaster from his thoughts. That too, Harry, he admitted. Harry could not fault the man for it. He too now understood what it was to care for someone so much that the rest of the world could burn so long as their smile could be seen reflecting off the flames. The Hollows were our dream. We would unite them and spend the rest of our days together knowing we had done what no other in history had. It was foolish, but so were we, young fools in love. If the man was looking for pity, he would get none from Harry. He had been responsible for much of the hardship he had faced, and though they were temporarily working together, their relationship would never blossom beyond the truce they had silently agreed upon. The power the Dark Lord knows not, Harry muttered, the words of the prophecy coming to the forefront of his mind. The wand? Dumbledore questioned. Harry shook his head. The Hollows. Such a task to unite them is the work of several lifetimes. Even the combined efforts of myself and Gellert resulted in him locating only the wand, the easiest to track of the three. No, Harry, your weapon against Tom is something he has no understanding of. Love. Love will do nothing against the power of Tom. It is not love that will defeat him because I have very little of that, and only for a few people. Those I care for are not why I want him dead. If I was doing it for them, I wouldn't be doing it at all. I would flee just as they all wish me to. I am doing this because he has wronged me, and his death by my hands is the only thing that will give me closure. Sorry, Dumbledore, I am not doing this for any noble reason you wish to believe in. Do you truly believe that killing him will make you feel better? The headmaster tried. Yes. Cutting him down may not bring Charlie back, but it will go some way to righting the wrongs he has done to me. I see, Dumbledore sighed. Perhaps I wish for everyone to be so noble in their deeds that I fail to see the hatred and anger burning within them. Perhaps the problem is not with the world, but with the way I try to see it. Forgive me, Harry, but I do not understand hate and anger the way you do, and that is why we will never see eye to eye, Harry returned. You believe the things you have done are and were for the good of everyone. I serve only those of my blood, as is expected of me. I do not enjoy inflicting pain and suffering on others, but I will do so to keep those I care about safe. I have no delusions of grandeur, because I believe that being the Lord Black is the greatest honor I will ever receive in my life. To me there is no higher position, none that I would seek beyond what I am. A Black through and through, Dumbledore replied amusedly before he sobered. Do you find it strange that I believe you? It doesn't matter to me if you don't. Dumbledore stared at him speculatively before nodding and offering Harry his wand by the handle. If this were to fall into the hands of anyone with delusions of grandeur or lofty ambitions beyond their station, it could prove catastrophic. The history of the wand is bloody. each passing from one person to the next being the result of murder. I thought I would have to bury it with me in the hope the legacy became lost. Alas, you have proven to me that is a foolish notion. Somewhere at some time there will be others seeking this out. They may never find it, but I would not take that chance. You're giving it to me? Dumbledore nodded. Perhaps it will indeed prove the power that Tom knows not. I would sooner give this to you than see you fall, the rest of Wizarding Britain with you. If it proves to be incorrect, then nothing has been lost. Harry hesitated as he reached for the wand, and Dumbledore released a deep breath. I am an old man, Harry, one that has lived many years, and not likely many more. Tom may succeed in killing me, and if he were to learn of the wand and it were to come into his possession, your job would exponentially more difficult. It is better I take a chance on you and have faith that you are as good a man as I believe, than let it fall into the hands of one that has proven himself irredeemable. What if I took it and killed you? Then I would be proven wrong once again. Do not make me the fool for a third time, my boy. The power of the wand thrummed through him as he gripped it, though it was not the warmth he was expecting. The magic was cold but held the same familiarity as the stone, the cloak, and part of his own magic. It felt as if the magic within the wand nestled into his own, almost sighing the same way one would when sinking into a hot bath. It became a part of him immediately, content that it had found something it had been searching for. To him, it felt not a burden as Dumbledore had described. The weight was noticeable but did not sit heavy. That's quite a wand, he muttered. As he met the eyes of the headmaster, the man was frowning thoughtfully. I should have warned you, but it seems our reactions were quite different when we held it for the first time. I found myself struggling to assimilate it with my magic. It took many weeks to tame it or for us to reach a somewhat tentative bond, yet it seems to have accepted you readily. How do you feel? It was cold, but I feel fine, Harry answered with a shrug. It feels like it belongs with me. Maybe it is the Peverell blood. If you do indeed have Peverell blood, it would explain rather a lot, Dumbledore returned. No matter, it is not something one should dwell on. We should both simply be grateful that it was a smooth transition. Harry was only half listening to the man as he inspected the wand. There was little noteworthy to be seen. The wood was almost as pale as bone, and berries had been carved into the shaft. Other than the evenly spaced knots of wood, it was like any other wand other than the feeling it gave him. Just holding it in his hand made him feel like he could level the entire room with a single curse. The conversation between the two went no further as an ethereal lynx appeared before them. Albus, Death Eaters in Diagon Alley. He is with them. Harry had turned to leave the room before the Patronus had vanished, only to be stopped in his tracks by Dumbledore. If you wish to get there quicker, Harry, might I remind you I have a certain advantage we can put to use. Harry paused in his steps and fired off 2 patronae of his own as he made his decision. It would be foolish to not seize the advantage at hand. You and your people keep your distance. I will deal with Tom, he commanded, his magic already pulsing through his veins in anticipation of the impending fight. As you wish, Dumbledore complied as he grabbed Harry by the wrist, the two vanishing in a plume of fire only a second later. Break. He's been gone for hours. Don't you think we should go after him? Sirius questioned worriedly. He, along with Leo, Arcturus and Cassie, were sat around the table in Grimmauld Place waiting for Harry to return. He is fine, Sirius, Arcturus replied confidently. Dumbledore would not be so foolish nor brazen to attempt anything as things are. You must remember he believes that Harry is destined to kill the Dark Lord. He will do nothing to jeopardize that. Sirius nodded, but was not mollified by the reasoning. He did not trust Dumbledore as far as he could throw the old git. The man would go to any lengths necessary to get what he wanted. He knew this from experience. We will give him a little longer, or I will go after him, Leo interjected, his posture stiff in his uneasiness of the situation. The group fell silent, the only sound to be heard in the room the gentle ticking of the morbid clock adorning the wall. Just as they began becoming restless again, a large 3-headed snake appeared in the room and spoke to them in the voice of the young man plaguing their thoughts. Tom is in Diagon Alley. Dad, Leo, get yourselves here. Cassie and Grandfather, make sure the house and Bellatrix are secure. I'm not taking any chances with him. Leo immediately sprung to his feet, followed by Sirius, who looked towards Arcturus questioningly. He is the lord of our family. It is he you should be following, the old man instructed. It was clear that he was unhappy with his role, his preference being in the thick of the action. However, he was not one to disobey an order. Harry would have his reasons for wanting him here, if only to ensure the safety of the house and security of their most prized prisoner. Pondering it further, he had to agree. Tom was far too unpredictable to take any chances. If he had any inclination that Bellatrix was here, he would come for her. He watched as Leo and Sirius vanished before his eyes, lamenting on the days it would be him leading the family through such issues, but he smiled. Nevertheless, he had made the right choice in air and had vacated his position at the right time. His tired bones could no longer cope with responsibility of leading their great family. Doing as he was bid, he checked the wards around the home as Cassie went to check on his granddaughter. Over his dead body would any make it past the threshold of the house. Break. Harry and Dumbledore arrived amidst the chaos of battle, both conjuring a large slab of marble to intercept a plethora of curses sent their way as they appeared. Giving a cursory glance around to ascertain his position, Harry noted the tide of the battle had yet to turn in favor of either side. He had his back to the combined forces of the Aurors and the members of the Order that had pulled together close to Florian Fortescue's, sheltered behind a series of makeshift barriers to protect them from spellfire. At the very front, leading by example, was James Potter, locked in a furious duel with a Death Eater confident enough in his abilities to defend himself from the onslaught sent his way. The rest of the group were locked in combat with the forces the Dark Lord had gathered, but there was no sign of the man himself. Another barrage of spells smashed against his hastily erected construct, as he spotted a head of bright pink hair amongst those to his rear. With a growl, he aimed his wand at a Death Eater that had taken the high ground on a nearby roof, intent on seizing an advantage for himself. With a whipping motion, the invisible line he had created pulled taut, and he tugged, eliciting a scream from the man as he was hurled from the roof and hit the cobbled pavement with a loud crack. Unmoving, he continued to scream in agony until he was silenced by another spell courtesy of Harry. For a brief moment there was a lull in the battle as both sides had paused to witness the demise of the man, both shocked by the viscous and sudden display of ruthlessness. Dumbledore gave him a questioning look and Harry shrugged, unconcerned by the disapproval. He was not the headmaster, nor did they share the same morals. He was not willing to risk being injured or killed because he was merciful. It was him or them, and he had no intention of it being the former. Firing off a plume of thick fog towards his foes, he headed to where he had spotted the familiar mop of hair and found himself pulled into the arms of Tonks, who was amongst her colleagues, who looked at him nervously. "I got your patronus whilst I was already here. How did you know about it?" "I was with Dumbledore when Shacklebolt sent the message. Leo and Sirius should be here soon." "Where's Tom?" he questioned, his eyes scanning the opposing group who had managed to dispel his fog. Tonks stared at him fearfully, the concern evident in her tense features. "He was here but didn't stay long," she sighed. "So, he is here for a reason. Did you see where he went?" She shook her head apologetically, worrying her lower lip. "It's going to happen, Dora. You already know it." "That doesn't mean I have to like it, Harry," she bit back. He gave her a sad smile as he squeezed her gently before the pair were interrupted by the arrival of Leo and Sirius, both seemingly itching for a fight. "All right, Black, put her down. There'll be plenty of time for that later," Leo quipped as he drew his wand and fired off a blasting curse towards a group of approaching masked witches and wizards. His spell hit the intended mark, leaving a sizable crater in between the groups, spraying debris amongst the Dark Lord's forces. Most managed to shield, with only a few being taken out of the equation momentarily. The spell, however, had the desired effect by dispersing the closely knit group, sending them back towards their own lines. Taking advantage of the respite, Harry turned to Sirius and Leo, grateful he had them along with Tonks amongst so many potential enemies from both sides of the conflict. "Dad, go and protect James. The last thing we need is any political issues to deal with. At the moment he is our greatest asset." Sirius frowned, but did not object before he headed off to carry out his task. Harry knew the man would much rather be by his side, but he was most familiar with James and how he fought. He was the best option to protect the new minister. Leo, work with the auras. If they are as unprepared as I expect, they will need your help. Leo nodded, but was held back by Harry as he turned away. Keep an eye on them. If anyone seems as though they are going to do something stupid, take them out. Leo gripped his shoulder tightly, the look he gave solemn and reassuring. I will. What about me? Tonks asked. Shouldn't you be asking Moody? Harry answered with a grin. I'm asking you, you idiot, she returned. Harry snorted. You'll be with me. Make sure no one interferes when Tom decides to show his face. Tonks' grip tightened around her wand as she readied herself. The Death Eaters seemed to have recovered somewhat from his and Leo's attacks, and were forming up into small groups, but they didn't attack. They simply waited for the auras to engage them, causing Harry to begin pondering the situation further. What the bloody hell are they doing? Leo called. Harry's eyes widened as he cursed himself. It was not Tom's way to meet on an even battlefield. Though he could not have been certain of the resistance he would face, he had prepared accordingly, and the only thing the force in front of him could be was a distraction. What could be so important for him to take such risk? Harry questioned himself internally. Diagon Alley was nothing more than a shopping district. There was only one place of importance here, and that was Gringotts. Shifting his gaze towards the bank in the distance, the wards were visible, likely having been activated as soon as the goblins became aware of the conflict just outside their walls. He shook his head. Even Tom would not be so foolish to attempt such a brazen assault against them, and certainly not on his own. No, something else must have brought him here. He got his answer only a moment later when an almighty explosion rent the air from nearby, and Harry instinctively pulled Tonks to the ground to avoid the whistling splinters of wood and chunks of mortar sent their way. Spellfire from the Death Eaters followed instantly. Using his wand, he ripped up a large section of pavement and cocooned it around them just in time for several unknown curses to impact against it. Are you okay? Harry asked frantically. Tonks nodded, and he pushed himself to his feet as he banished their temporary shield towards the Death Eaters, only for it to be destroyed mid-air by a blasting curse. Amid the explosion, the enemy had been riled into a frenzy, their unusually placid presence all but absent. Spell after spell left their wands, their only intent being to cause maximum damage and fatalities before they undoubtedly fled, as was their way. The auras had been put on the back foot, relegated to merely defending themselves from the sudden onslaught. Harry could hear Leo shouting instructions, trying to regain some semblance of composure amongst the ranks, his voice seemingly falling on deaf ears as many hid behind their makeshift barriers, hoping to avoid the carnage. Knowing something had to be done, he took Tonks by the wrist and pulled her behind a large piece of rock that had been torn from either a building or the pavement. He knew not. He began muttering under his breath, weaving his wand in intricate patterns as Tonks looked on curiously. It took a few moments to finish his work, and he hoped it would be enough to make the needed difference. So long as the Death Eaters felt they held the advantage, their attack would continue. He fired off a Petronus each to Sirius and Leo to warn them of the expected effects, and turned to Tonks. "What did you do?" "You will want to cover your eyes," he advised, as he banished the rock into the sky before erecting a mage shield around himself and the woman. As he had anticipated, it was hit with a blasting curse as his other projectile had been. However, this one did not simply explode. It hovered above the gathered Death Eaters and trembled violently, emitting a sound like rumbling thunder. "Shields!" a voice screamed. Even before the voice had sounded, the rock erupted into a white ball of blinding light, a stark contrast to the night sky, blinding any unfortunate soul that had not looked away in time. With another rumble, chunks of glowing rock broke off steadily and fell, landing amongst the Dark Lord's followers. At first it appeared as though nothing was happening until a pained scream could be heard, followed by several more. Harry grinned maliciously as he spotted a robed figure collapse to the ground, a scream of agony and shock being pulled from his throat. He clawed desperately at his face and unwittingly pulled the mask away, revealing his rapidly decaying skin, illuminated by the still crumbling rock above, acting as a spotlight. A few people emptied their stomachs at the sight of the spectacle, the sound of retching and the resulting vomit able to be heard in between the screams of those that fell victim to the attack and the stunned silence from the onlookers. Unwilling to wait for any rebuttal, Harry fired off a string of curses, hoping to catch the morbidly captivated Death Eaters off guard, only for a figure to emerge from the masses and bat his efforts away almost effortlessly. "I must admit I am surprised to see you, Harry." Voldemort greeted him with a mocking bow, his crimson eyes narrowed in distaste. Harry gritted his teeth as he readied himself. "Surprised?" he growled. "Did your little pets not pass on my message?" He fired off another flurry of spells, not waiting to trade barbs with the man. He wanted him dead, not for conversation. The time for talking was over and there was nothing more to be said. Voldemort sidestepped the spells, evidently not recognizing some of darker offerings the blacks had in their arsenal. The followers behind him were not so lucky, as 3 fell where they stood, one bursting into green flames from the inside out, one having their throat torn out and the other with a viscous substance pouring from their nose and ears, the brain having been liquefied inside the skull. "That was rather impolite," Voldemort sighed uncaringly. "It is fortunate for you that I have much more pressing matters to attend to this evening." He held out a hand and summoned something into his grasp. Something turned out to be someone, and Harry was met with the sight of a barely standing Ollivander. Had Tom not been holding the man by the throat, it was unlikely he would be upright by his volition. "You see, I believe that our resident wandmaker may have some fascinating information for me." "Well, it appears that he did for you. Learning that you visited him certainly piqued my curiosity enough to orchestrate our little gathering tonight. I will be seeing you, Harry, when I decide we should face one another once more," Tom finished before vanishing in a puff of dark smoke, his final words ringing in the ears of those remaining. The Death Eaters also took it as their cue to make a hasty retreat, leaving only the Ministry entourage, the Order and Harry with his own allies. "Fucking coward," he spat, the weight of the Elder Wand concealed in his left sleeve feeling heavier. He had not used it during the short battle, not trusting a wand he had not practiced with. Instead, he had opted to use his own wand, the one he was familiar with and had yet to let him down. Not that it had this time, either. Tom's cowardice had been the deciding factor for how this encounter had concluded. He snorted at Tom's premature foray into the open, now leaving any doubters with no such thing any longer. Ollivander could help him very little. At most, the man could reveal their discussion, but it is already too late. Harry had already secured the wand, and Tom would be wasting time if he decided to pursue it. He felt for the wandmaker. On both occasions they had met, he had been respectful, helpful, and a font of knowledge about his chosen lore, but there was little to be done for the man. Harry did not have the trusted manpower to carry out a rescue mission on Malfoy Manor, and it would be likely only him able to get through the wards. The cloak was a boon, but as with everything it was not infallible, and he could not risk a failing emerging whilst in such a vulnerable position, not until he was assured of his victory. There were too many unknowns about Tom, his operation, and the manner to attempt a meaningful recovery of the man and any other prisoner that was held there. He sighed as he shook his head. He wanted Tom dead, but he had to be cautious. He was not feared for no reason, and Harry fully intended on surviving their inevitable meeting. The continuation of his family depended on it, as did the happiness of the woman now attempting to soothe the back of his hand with a thumb. "What are you going to do, Harry?" Tonks whispered. "Nothing, for now," he replied. "I have to be patient, Dora. But there is one person that might be able to give me an edge." His thoughts wandered to the woman held prisoner in the family home. If anyone knew of any advantages he could use against Tom, it would be his right-hand woman. Harry eyed the arranged pieces before him, contemplating his next move. He would never consider himself an adept player of chess, but he had played his fair share of games. Though seldom the victor, he had a few tricks up his sleeve. The violet eyes of his opponent watched him intently, a smirk pulling at her lips. Like a shark smelling blood, she was ready to go in for the kill. Her smirk faded into a frown as a rook blocked her queen, leaving her with no other moves to be made. "I'm getting tired of losing to you," she sighed. She shivered as the grey orbs of her captor bored into her own. Never in her life had she felt so unnerved by another that was not the man she had pledged to serve. The new Lord Black was cut from the same cloth as her master. He was charismatic, gifted, and oh so very dangerous. It had taken only a moment in the same room as the young man to feel it. It had terrified her and excited her equally. Here she had no power of her own, magically or politically. She was at the mercy of the lord of her first family. Their first encounter had been an overwhelming one, stirring memories that had only ever existed in her mind during her incarceration. Yet, when she first laid eyes on him, they felt so very real. Flashback. Bellatrix was restless. She was grateful that she was no longer held on the cursed island under the effects of the cursed creatures, but she was not where she wanted to be. She was no fool. It was her master that had come for her the night she was taken from Azkaban by the unknown boy who had claimed to have ties to her family. His words had proven to be truthful. When she had awoken here, it was the image of her Aunt Cassiopeia that had greeted her, her visage more aged and worn than the last time she had seen the woman. Truth be told, she had little to complain about. She was aware of the treatment bestowed upon those that found themselves captives of the Blacks. Many would argue that Azkaban was a kinder fate, less cruel and bearable. Fortunately, Bellatrix shared their blood and had been treated well, her aunt even taking the trouble to fix her rotten teeth so that she could eat without discomfort, and her hair so that it was tameable once more. She was also given real food, something she had been deprived of since her imprisonment at the end of the war. She was not where she wished to be, but she was much better off than she had been. Her aunt visited a few times a day to check on her and bring her the fare she was allowed. The conversations between the two were short and awkward at best, neither feeling that there was much to say. Cassiopeia saw her as a threat, a traitor to the family, and Bellatrix felt nothing for the woman. There was only one that held her loyalty. Even her grandfather, who had visited her only on one occasion, had little to say, only to echo the thoughts of her aunt and vocalize his disappointment in her choices. She too had been disappointed. Arcturus Black had once stood proudly, his sharp eyes and wit stilling any that fell under his gaze. Now he was nothing but an old man who was likely not long for this world. The Blacks had fallen from grace during the prior decades, and it seemed that had hit rock bottom. They remained but a shadow of the family they once were, wealthy but their reputation in tatters. She shook her head. She had been proud of her name, of the blood that flowed through her veins. Seeing how far her family had fallen had filled her with shame during her younger years. That was until she had met the Dark Lord and had been promised the name Black would once again be remembered, their sullied reputation restored to its former glory. He had changed her life, this handsome and charismatic man. He had listened to her, appreciated her abilities, and had on many occasions named her his most treasured follower. He had done more for her than those that dared call themselves her family. What had they done? They had arranged a marriage for her that was supposed to be pleasing. Rudolphus had once been a handsome man, but a half-wit and someone far below what she deserved. Her grandfather had stood by and allowed it, and Andy had the gall to run off with a mudblood, tarnishing her fraying perception of those that had raised her further. Thankfully, her lord had come along soon after, and the rest was history. The smile pulling at her lips faded into a frown as she heard footsteps descending the stairs outside her door. They were lighter than her aunt's, slow, labored ones. These were those of a person much younger, still nimble with youth. She stood as the door opened and admitted a young man with an air of familiarity about him. It wasn't the look of the Blacks that caught her attention, though he had that in abundance. It was his presence, the somewhat stifling feel of his magic. It was almost intoxicating, pulling the breath from his lungs the closer he approached. She glanced up and met the shimmering grey of his pools, and shuddered slightly. She had been right in her assumption. He was young, barely standing before her. A man. He was tall, but not overly so. His build lithe and the features of the blacks prominent, though there was more to him. However, it was not his look that had enraptured her, it was all the things that could not be seen, the familiarity she had first felt. There was something of her master about him, the confidence in which he carried himself and even his demeanor. It was unnerving to say the least, that coupled with the suffocating magic he exuded, that of her family, that of her master and others she knew not, she could barely draw breath to greet him. She needn't have worried, it was he that broke the silence, scrutinizing her under his glare. She could have sworn his eyes flashed as green as one of her favorite spells. That green stilled her, her own violet orbs widening as she realized the boy that had plagued her during her incarceration was standing before her. "Bellatrix," he greeted her. She could only nod, her words dying on her tongue. In her less lucid moments, he had come to her, rescued her from her eventual fate, had been her savior. She shook her head once more, reminding herself that what she had seen was but a figment of her addled mind. Even if the man was real, he had never come for her. "And who might you be?" she mocked. "Some bastard half-breed that has managed to worm your way into the House of Black." The man had the audacity to smirk at her before he chuckled. "I heard you were rather sharp with your tongue. Do keep hold of it or you may find it no longer in your possession," he warned. Bellatrix raised a delicate brow in his direction but was unable to respond, her lips having been sealed by an unseen spell. She reached up only to find that her lips were no longer where they should be. Instead, she felt skin as smooth as the rest of her face. She panicked. She had seen no wand, nor felt anything change. She breathed in short bursts through her nose until the effects of a calming charm washed over her. Her breathing slowed to a steady rhythm, and she glared at the man who was unconcerned by the underlying threat she promised. "You will remain civil or I will leave you like that permanently. Understood?" Bellatrix narrowed her eyes but nodded, deciding that she would ponder her revenge when she was in a much more advantageous position. He gestured for her to take a seat and did so himself without waiting for her to comply. With another scowl, she sat on a chair a short distance away. "My name is Harry Black, the new lord of the family," he introduced himself. "Is my grandfather dead?" she questioned uncaringly. Harry shook his head. "Retired. He passed the headship down to me." Bellatrix nodded. The man hadn't appeared well enough to lead the family from what she had seen. The Lord Black needed to be strong, unbreakable. Thus far this Harry seemed to be both. "And just how is it that you became his heir?" "I proved my worth," Harry responded. "I carry the blood of the Blacks and was raised black." Truth be told, there was no other choice. Sirius was cast out and there was no other suitable heir. "Sissy has a son," Bellatrix pointed out. Harry snorted. "A clone of his idiot father. This family would become nothing more than a new bank account for that scumbag. Well, he would need the funds. The wealth of the Malfoys is no more." Bellatrix quirked her head questioningly. "Lucius made stupid choices trying to climb above his station. It has not ended well for him," Harry offered with a dismissive shrug. Bellatrix didn't fight the grin tugging at her lips. She had always despised Lucius. He had always been a pompous fool, with only his galleons being anything of worth about the man. "I suppose you have come to tell me of my fate?" Harry shook his head. "I've not truly decided what to do with you yet. That depends on how helpful you prove to be." "I will not turn traitor on my master," Bellatrix hissed. Again she was met with a shrug. "I know your master better than any. I know all I need to know to put an end to him." There was a moment of silence before Bellatrix broke down in peals of laughter. She had come across many that fancied themselves the hero that would kill the Dark Lord, from all walks of life. Experts in every field had been tasked with such, and they all had one thing in common. They had all fallen victim to the power her master wielded. Her laughter died as the boy before her remained stoic, his only giveaway to what he was feeling being another brief flash of emerald flaring in his orbs. "You know nothing," she returned, a stab of jealousy making itself known. No one knew her master, not the way she did. He had shared his hopes and dreams with her, had spent hours tutoring her in magic so that she would be only second to him with a wand in hand. They had conversed in depth during her formative years, both opening up about the lives they had led, the adversity they had overcome along with their respective successes and failures. He had done no such thing with any other. "So, you willingly followed a half-blood?" Harry probed. Bellatrix shot to her foot, her eyes bulging in fury. "How dare you?" she spat. "The Dark Lord is the heir of Slytherin, a greater family than our own." Harry chuckled. "A family that fell out of favor almost a millennium ago. Salazar helped find a school," he shrugged. "The family has done nothing of note since. They bred amongst themselves and practically became squibs. Tom is an exception. His mother was a Gaunt and his father a Muggle." "Lies," Bellatrix screeched as she launched herself at the boy. She was frozen in place with a flick of his wand, his rebuttal calm as though one of the most dangerous witches alive had not just attempted to attack him with her bare hands. "His name is Tom Marvolo Riddle, son of Merope Gaunt and a Muggle boy she absconded with. She died giving birth to him, and he was raised in an orphanage. What do I have to gain from lying?" Bellatrix panted heavily, her efforts trying to break free from his hold, leaving her still recovering body exhausted. After a few moments, she calmed herself. This boy was lying, trying to manipulate her into helping him. She would not play into his hands. "You will never beat him," she whispered breathily. "His magic is beyond any other. You cannot beat what you don't understand, Lord Black." The boy grinned at her as he stood, his nose only an inch from her own. "I have already bettered him. Twice he has fled from me like the coward he is. It is only a matter of time before he can no longer flee." A shiver worked its way down her spine at the cold certainty in his voice, but she dismissed the words, reminding herself he was trying to get into her head. What he said could only be false. Even she had never come close to defeating the man in a duel. "Lies," she returned once more. "Why don't you see for yourself?" he offered. Her eyes were drawn to his as though she no longer had control of them. His magic washed over her, and she immediately felt his presence in her mind, unsettling her. She could only watch as a series of memories played. When they ceased, she almost keeled over as his magic receded, her own having been dominated by the overwhelming force. She managed to remain on her feet, though her legs trembled as she digested what she had seen. Had the memories been false? She would have known. Her skill in the mind arts had once been exceptional and was still beyond the average practitioner. She, however, felt no falsehood in what she had witnessed. "You took him by surprise," she dismissed. "Perhaps," Harry conceded, "but it was he that fled. Such a powerful Dark Lord that he runs from a teenager." Bellatrix positively cackled. "You truly believe he fears you? I have witnessed him take down much more powerful wizards than you could hope to ever be." Her breath caught in her throat as she pulled upwards from her chair, the squeezing of her neck intensifying as she dangled helplessly a foot or so from the ground. She tried to fight off whatever force had gripped her so, choking as she struggled to draw breath, all the while the eerie emerald eyes stared into her own. What did surprise her was the lack of wand in his hands, and her final thoughts before she lost consciousness was that she had undoubtedly underestimated the new lord of her first family. She came to shortly after in a crumpled heap on the floor, coughing uncontrollably as Harry watched, once more seated in his chair. "You have a few tricks," she conceded hoarsely, pulling herself to her feet, "but my lord has more. The magic of the Blacks cannot compete with the magic of Slytherin." The boy raised a brow in her direction and began hissing the same way the Dark Lord did when he was conversing with his familiar or particularly furious. She again found herself surprised as a black snake emerged from within his sleeve and began hissing in response. "How?" she asked, dumbfounded by the latest development. The boy was proving to be more and more than she would ever have believed. "Let's just say that Tom has sealed his own fate. Believe it or not, I didn't want any of this. I gave him the chance to walk away and he chose to act against me. For that he will die the most painful death I can manage." With his declaration ringing in her ears, he stood. "You will be held here until Tom is dealt with. After that, who knows? I will not release you only for such a foolish act to work against me." You may as well accept it, because nothing will sway my mind. If you attempt to escape this room, you will die. The wards have been altered to be very unforgiving to any that carry his mark. Do I make myself clear?" Bellatrix could only nod, displeased but not despondent. There would always be a way to escape. The boy would lapse somewhere, and she would take full advantage of it when the time was right. "Good. Now is there anything I can do to make your stay more comfortable? You are still a black after all, and it is my duty to ensure you are well kept. Will you come back?" she blurted. "I'd like someone to play chess with." She couldn't be sure as to why she made the request. Perhaps she was curious, or perhaps she was starved of company from her stint in Azkaban, but she found something about him enrapturing. He was an enigma, a conundrum, and she found herself wanting to solve him. He merely nodded before leaving, and Bellatrix did not expect to see him again. She, however, was proven wrong. As promised with the simple gesture, he had returned, and on several occasions. End flashback. Strangely, the two had begun to cultivate a relationship of sorts. She couldn't be sure if they had grown to respect one another, if it was a familial bond or even a friendship, but things had developed, and she found herself enjoying his company, despite him almost killing her during their first encounter. They would whittle hours away playing chess, discussing magic, or sharing a simple conversation. It was strange for the woman. The boy was determined to end her lord, but she enjoyed his company nonetheless. She tried to dismiss her feelings, attributing them to little more than an escape from the monotony of her days, but it was more, and she steadily became aware of it. Over the past 3 months she had learned much about him, about the brilliance of his mind and the power he possessed. As much as she tried to deny it, there were many familiarities the boy shared with the Dark Lord. But there was more to him. Occasionally she would see glimpses of humility, of the pain and sadness he had endured. She needed not to hear of his woes to see such. Truly, the minor differences between them is what made them stand apart. They were both ruthless, stood above the average wizard in terms of ability, and had overcome much adversity. Her master had chosen to turn against the world, to forge a path that would lead him to greatness at the expense of others. Harry, though as dangerous, had chosen his family to protect those he held in his heart and those that could not do what he could. He was a lord she would have been proud to call her own had things been different when she was younger. She, however, had made her choices, and she had no regrets. Her grandfather had not been as Harry's, had not been able to pull the seams together of the fraying ends that was her family. Between herself and the other blacks, the fabric had been torn, and what remained had been but tatters. Over the days and weeks she had spent at Grimmauld Place, she learnt that there was no safer place for her to be. Were she to return to the service of the Dark Lord, Harry would prove to be true to his word, and kill her, or it was likely she would be returned to Azkaban. There was also the problem of the boy sat opposite her. In a very strange way she had grown to care for him. She worried for him when he ventured away from the house, and could not relax until she knew he had returned safe. That was more than she could ever say about her fellow Death Eaters, and though she cared for the teen, the confliction she felt about the boy and her master tore her apart. Being where she was meant that she did not have to choose a side, that could remain somewhat ignorant to her internal struggle. She knew that if she were to be liberated, the choice she would have to make would be difficult. Being here meant such a choice was not necessary. She was pulled from her thoughts by a hand waving in front of her face. "Are you all right, Bella?" Harry questioned. The woman nodded and offered him a rare smile. "I'm fine," she replied dismissively. "Would you like another game?" She shook her head. "Losing to you does no good for my ego," she sighed. Harry chuckled as he packed the board away with a flick of his wand. "You've come close to beating me a few times." Bellatrix snorted. "I was never very good at chess. I prefer a battle of wands rather than minds. Do you think you could beat me?" Bellatrix frowned as she considered her answer. He was gifted. That she couldn't deny, but she had much more experience. "I don't know all of what you are capable of," she returned, the frown still firmly in place. Harry grinned as he stood and stretched. "Perhaps one day when this is all over, we will find out." There must be a good reason that you are the most feared witch in the country." The moniker would have once filled her with pride. Now it barely stoked the embers of what remained of the fire inside her. She was tired, maybe a little wiser in her slowly advancing years. Regardless, the title did little for her. "Perhaps," she returned. "That's if you don't cart me off back to Azkaban." "I suppose only time will tell," he offered ominously, before taking his leave. Bellatrix released a deep breath through her nose, the uncertainty of her future playing on her mind. Whatever her fate would be, depended solely on the boy that had just left. Were he to fail in his endeavor to put an end to the Dark Lord, the uncertainty would only increase. She knew not what Sirius or Cassie would do if it were left to them to decide. The former would likely kill her, and the latter, she couldn't be certain. All she knew was that her life would never be what it once was, even if the Dark Lord somehow managed to liberate her. Things had changed for her. She had been enthralled by the man, his power, and his charm. Now she had experienced another just as powerful but different in his ways. She no longer knew exactly what it was she wanted, and again the conflict within made itself known. Doing all she could to occupy her mind elsewhere, she readied herself for bed, hoping that she would not be put in a position where she would have to choose between the two. Break. The atmosphere of the previous year within the castle was all but absent, having been replaced with one of tension and uncertainty. Sirius had a keen sense of tension, having grown under the roof of his mother. Hogwarts was rife with it, and had he not developed such a keen sense, it would still have been unmissable. Students were oft seen amongst only their own peers, avoiding socializing with any other than those they were familiar. The castle had divided itself predominantly into the houses they had been selected for upon arrival in their first year. It was commonplace to see pockets of the red and gold of Gryffindor, the silver and green of Slytherin, the blue and bronze of Ravenclaw and yellow of Hufflepuff, congregating amongst themselves. It was a sight reminiscent of Voldemort's first rise to power, and it only served to unsettle the animagus. With that aside, there was little else to redeem the school. His classes were progressing slowly, the caliber of previous professors shining through in the ineptitude of the students. Had they not been under the tutelage of Moody the previous year, he shuddered to think how much worse they could be. The students could not be blamed, of course. It was them that had been let down in their education by those responsible for providing quality instructors. This simply had not been done for many years, another failing of Dumbledore undoubtedly. If it weren't for the secondary reason he had taken the job, he would have written the whole thing off as a bad idea. Very few of the students would get the OWL or NEET results needed, even with the rigorous instruction he had them under. There just wasn't enough time to close such a gap. No. Although he would continue working with them as best he could, it was keeping an eye on Dumbledore that kept him here, or so he had initially thought. The man disappeared for days at a time without Sirius any the wiser as to what he was doing. He suspected that it was work for the Order, or at least something towards putting an end to Voldemort. He would return to the castle exhausted from whatever efforts he had made, speaking to none as to his whereabouts. Sirius had accepted he would likely learn little of the man's movements. He was as secretive and elusive as he had always been. What had caught his attention, however, and had been his new focus, was one Draco Malfoy. He didn't know the boy personally, but he could only imagine that the offspring of his cousin and Lucius would have been rotten. Thus far he had proven it on several occasions. Already there had been a few unpleasant incidences, another student cursed here or there, and rather dangerous spell work being used in his own lessons. The spells had certainly been passed on by the boy's father, and it left the wayward Black concerned for the safety of his charges. To his own irritation, Dumbledore had been rather blasé towards Malfoy's conduct, dismissing the incidences out of hand. For the life of him, Sirius could not comprehend what the headmaster was thinking. Draco should have been expelled and should certainly not be free to roam around the castle unchecked. Something was happening with the Slytherin. Sirius could feel it, but any concern raised was falling on deaf ears. Because of this, he vowed to keep a closer eye on him. At first it had been difficult to do so. Draco was tetchy, on edge, as though he knew he was being watched. The paranoid behavior only made Sirius more determined to find out what he was up to. He didn't think he had been marked, but he was not willing to risk Voldemort's unpredictability. Draco was up to something, and it was unclear when he would strike next, and who against. His worries had brought him once more to Dumbledore's office. Again, the man had returned shortly from one of his recent excursions, and Sirius was determined that the man would hear about and act upon his concerns. If he did not, he would take it upon himself to do so. After several minutes of waiting by the gargoyle, it sprung aside to admit him. Traversing the stairs, he entered through the open door to be greeted by the sight of a very tired headmaster and an agitated Snape. "How is it? I may help you, Sirius?" the older man questioned, the usual twinkle in his eyes dimmer than usual. "We really need to discuss the Malfoy boys," Sirius replied without preamble. The man visibly sunk in his chair as the potions master narrowed his eyes suspiciously in his direction. "You may not want to admit it, but he is up to something. Twice in only a few days, I have found him out of his common room during the early hours. He had no reasonable explanation as to why. He's up to something, Albus." Dumbledore nodded. "Mr. Malfoy is just the person Severus and I were discussing. He too shares your concerns. If even Black can see it, surely you can no longer ignore the problem," Snape drawled, his lip curling into a sneer. Sirius ignored the barb, pleased to have an ally after the past few months, even if it was in the form of the greasy man whom he had despised since the two had met so many years ago. "What would you have me do? Without evidence, I cannot act, unless you can implicate Draco without any doubt in a nefarious incident. Little can be done. The boy does not deserve to suffer because of the actions of his father." "He is the bloody same as his father," Sirius growled. "He is unpleasant, a bigot, and you know as well as I do that he is responsible for many of the things happening here." Dumbledore sighed as he shook his head. "Be that as it may, it does not warrant expulsion." Before Sirius could reply, he was cut off by the arrival of a cat Patronus, speaking in the voice of his former head of house. "Albus, something has happened. Miss Bell seems to have come into contact with a cursed necklace. She is in the hospital wing with Poppy, and we are awaiting the arrival of a team from St. Mungo's." With much more energy than he appeared currently capable of, the headmaster shot to his feet and headed for the door. "Come, both of you, I may need your assistance," he commanded, his stride not breaking as he headed towards his student in need. Sirius followed with Snape in his wake, his mind contemplating what he had just heard. Miss Bell could only be one person, and he could not help but think she had been targeted intentionally. There was only one person that would have motive to do such a thing, and judging by the pale visage of Severus Snape, he too had reached the same conclusion. Hesitating for only a moment, he fired off a Patronus of his own. For what good it would do he did not know, but Leo would never forgive him if he did not tell him. The duo arrived shortly after Dumbledore, who had immediately begun trying to discern just what had happened to the girl. She had been placed on a bed, was pale and unmoving, the only sign of life being the gentle rising and falling of her chest as she breathed shallowly. "Severus," Dumbledore called, "the necklace." Snape's only response was a nod as he set to work on a rather elaborate construct that had been placed upon a pillow. It seemed innocuous enough, other than the grandeur of the piece. Sirius was no expert in jewelry, but even to the untrained eye it was very high-end and not something that could be purchased by those of average wealth. "What happened?" he asked McGonagall, who watched on helplessly as Dumbledore and Snape attempted to save the girl's life. She visited the bathroom in the Three Broomsticks and emerged with the necklace wrapped in silk. Miss Johnson could get no sense from her, and a scuffle ensued when she attempted to take it from her. She was wearing gloves, but there was a hole in one and her skin must have brushed against it, the woman answered mechanically. She apparently was not acting herself. Sirius frowned as he pondered the information. None of his earlier assumptions made sense. If Katie had been the target, surely whomever gave her the necklace would have done so without the need of subterfuge. It could have simply been placed on her person at any time. Why all the effort if she was the intended? "Was anything else said?" he pressed. "Only that she was determined to deliver it to someone in the castle. She did not specify whom." Sirius's frown deepened. There was much more to this. It appeared that Katie had either been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the necklace would kill both her and whomever she had been instructed to gift it to. Failing that, she would have been implicated in the attack at the very least, and caused an inordinate amount of issues for the girl. For the moment it mattered not, and he switched his focus towards Snape, who had evidently finished his work. Without addressing any other, he removed several vials from within his robes and administered them to Katie before drawing his wand and muttering under his breath inaudibly. This continued for several moments until he stopped suddenly and stumbled backwards into the arms of the headmaster. If it was possible, the man had paled even more than his usual milky complexion, and his already greasy hair was glistening with sweat from his efforts. "She was fortunate," he declared breathlessly. "She made only minimal contact with the curse. Had it been any more, it would have killed her before any could have helped." "Will she be okay?" McGonagall asked worriedly. "She will live," Snape returned ominously. "Until she wakes, there is no telling what lasting damage there will be." "Thank you, Severus. Perhaps you should rest yourself." Snape nodded before taking his leave, his legs unsteady under his own weight. "Minerva, inform Alistair of what has happened here. The Aurors will need to investigate this." McGonagall pursed her lips as she too exited the hospital wing. "Do you see it now, Albus?" Sirius questioned irritably. The man bowed in acknowledgement, the guilt he felt evident. "Indeed, this turn of events changes things. I can assure you, Sirius, should any evidence be found implicating any within this castle, they will be dealt with most harshly." Sirius doubted the man. Not once had Sirius witnessed anything resembling harshness from Dumbledore. He had always proven to be forgiving, and he could not believe this would be any different. No, it would be down to the Blacks to get to the bottom of this, if only to ensure Leo did not do something reckless in the pursuit of vengeance. Sirius knew the boy would not let this stand. He would move the heavens themselves if they were preventing him getting to those responsible. Sirius wouldn't blame him, but another stint in a wizarding prison was the last thing the boy needed. Break. For what could only have been days, he clung to her left hand, the right now marred with a blackened smudge of skin, where the curse still resided. According to the meaty wizard caring for her, it was no longer active, but the mark would likely remain. Katie had been transferred to St. Mungo's to recover, the hospital wing in the school unable to meet her needs any further than they had. He was grateful for the assistance of the potions master in saving her life, and that he had done. All who had examined the girl had agreed that the quick work of Severus Snape had given her a fighting chance. Yet she remained unmoving, her skin pallid as she slumbered. Leo yawned as he rubbed at the scruff that had formed on his chin. Upon his arrival at the castle, he had been a mess. Seeing Katie in the state she was in had instilled a sense of fear and anger within him, the latter being pushed aside after hearing what had happened. Whomever was responsible would come to light soon enough. Both Sirius and Harry had assured him of that. Whilst he bided his time, it was better spent where he was needed most. She would wake eventually, and there was nowhere else he would be until that moment. He was not alone in his vigil. Both Katie's parents refused to leave her side also. Though little was said between them, he could feel the accusing stares of the man attempting to immolate him. Was this his fault? He knew not. If it was indeed Malfoy responsible for what had happened, there would be nothing stopping him putting the man to rest for good. For now, however, he could only wait. He was not a godly man, but he had silently prayed to every deity he knew of for her to wake, for her to be okay. Break. The attack on Katie had become his new focus. Ever since the night in Diagon Alley, hide nor hair of Tom or the Death Eaters had been seen. Wizarding Britain had fallen into a lull of sorts, one that filled him with unease and left him restless. He knew that it was only a matter of time before the conflict resumed once more, that things were happening that he could not see. On his numerous checks of properties of known followers of the man, he had come up empty-handed. They were still lying low, and the uncertainty of what was to come plagued him at all hours. The incident in Hogsmeade, though unwelcome, had given him a trail to follow, as minute as it was. He had no doubt that Tom had in some way orchestrated it, but to what end? At first he had believed Katie to be the intended target of a plan that had ultimately failed. Perhaps Lucius felt himself once more untouchable enough to take his chances against Leo, but a clear mind had put that theory to rest. As Leo did, he believed there was much more to it, and that Katie had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Though he was certain in this, he refused to outright dismiss his first thoughts. There was always the possibility that she too had been a target along with whomever the package was destined for. Only two people within the castle would be worth risking much for, his own father and Dumbledore, neither of whom would readily accept a mysterious package, even from one known to them. The entire scheme reeked of amateurism, lack of thought, and poor execution. If Lucius had overseen this, he had proven to be more foolish than first believed. Harry shook his head. Lucius was many things, a fool even, but even he was beyond such a poorly concocted effort. No, there was much more to this, and Harry had taken it upon himself to investigate it further. The Aurors, though doing their utmost, were bound by regulations, and such boundaries would serve only to inhibit their progress, the trail growing ever colder the longer their own inquiries continued. That could not be allowed. To ensure that such a thing would not come to pass, he shouldered the responsibility of finding the guilty party. The undertaking of this would have proven to be much more difficult had it not been for his father. Truly, Harry had not known where to even begin. Logically, Lucius would have been his first option, but the man had proven his elusiveness. It was Sirius that had informed him of the erratic behavior the heir of the man had been displaying. Had he had other suspects available, he likely would have dismissed the boy. He was undoubtedly a fool and equally repugnant as he that had sired him, but Harry doubted he was capable of even formulating a plot like this. However, without any other apparent, he decided to humor the adamant man, which had proven to be much more fruitful than he would have thought possible. Sirius had explained his suspicions of the boy, his strange behaviors, his sickly appearance and nervous disposition. Taking the opportunity to put the cloak to use, the state of the boy was clear to see. No longer did he roam the castle as though he owned it. That typical Malfoy swagger was all but absent, replaced with what Harry could only describe as a lost boy. He displayed little of the actions Sirius had described. It was seldom he could be seen away from his common room, seemingly only leaving to attend classes before returning there. It did not match the habits he had adopted up until the day of the attack, and it made Harry suspect him all the more. Not once had Harry seen him during the small hours, nor did the boy do anything else to attract attention to himself other than send mail, a normal practice for students away from home. It was as though he was doing the opposite to what Sirius had observed, all seemingly in the effort of remaining undetected for a misdeed. It, however, was not enough, and Harry knew it. He could simply take the boy if he so wished, but even he could not justify the kidnap of an heir to a family such as the Malfoys. Despite the misdeeds of his father, Draco could not be categorically proven to be guilty. It would do nothing but turn many against him, and until Tom was dealt with, he needed the support of the Wizengamot. He banged his fist on his desk in frustration. Being the lord of the family was proving to be as much a boon as it was a hindrance. Though the title opened many doors to him, many others were closed. He had to be calculated, cunning enough to not provoke others beyond what could be assuaged later if required. Leaning too heavily on Draco could tip the balance against him. He frowned as one of the many wards he had placed around the country suddenly notified him of a disturbance. He had been waiting for 3 months for it to happen and had all but given up hope that any would be triggered. Retrieving his cloak, he placed it over him before vanishing with a gentle pop, following the trail of his own magic. He arrived just outside of Hogsmeade and released a sigh of annoyance. He had only placed one such ward here, and it was more likely than not a student out of bounds had been caught in his trap within the Shrieking Shack. Debating whether he should simply leave them to stew a while, he pushed open the door, his eyes widening in surprise as he spotted a familiar shade of platinum hair protruding from beneath a hood. "Well, I didn't expect you to fall so easily within my reach, Lucius." The man was struggling frantically against the magic that held him, his wand having been removed from his person upon falling into the trap. He froze at the sound of Harry's voice before the struggling began once more with renewed vigor, to no avail. After several moments he slumped defeatedly, his head shaking. "I suppose you have come to help your son out of the mess he has made. You certainly wouldn't be here unless it was absolutely necessary. Tell me, Lucius, who was the target?" Malfoy merely narrowed his eyes in an act of defiance, his lips firmly sealed. He did not look at all well, his usually sleek hair dry and skin a soured, milky color. The bags under his narrowed eyes were prominent, the product of a lack of sleep and stress. "Very well. I suppose I will have to loosen your tongue myself." Harry raised the Elder Wand and aimed towards the fidgeting man. Over the past weeks he had become very familiar with it, the results of his magic proving to be more than he had expected. Initially they had been on par with his own wand, but the more he used it the better it became. Although it continued to feel cold to the touch, it was a coldness he was becoming accustomed to. "Crucio," he growled, the silencing charm in place doing its job of ensuring none could hear the screams of Lucius Malfoy. "Break." The Dark Lord stared at his reflection in the mirror in the rooms that had been allocated to him within Malfoy Manor, the Lord's chambers, of course. Taking in his own scarlet gaze and hairless head, he released a deep breath through his nose. It was not the looks of his former body he missed, but the comfort, something he was lacking with the recent developments he had become aware of. Ever since the fateful night of his resurrection he'd been plagued with a feeling of discomfort, something akin to wearing shoes on the wrong feet, a feeling not only in his extremities but in every fiber of his being. At first the restorative potions he had been given by Severus had assisted him greatly and he had been able to ignore it. This, however, was no longer the case. The feeling followed him now always, and he could no longer pretend that it was not ailing him. Physically he felt fine for the most part. The ritual had worked, and the body created was strong, just not his own. Something had gone awry that night, something that left him questioning his decisions and actions of the past. Had he pushed the boundaries of magic too far? He knew not. All he knew for certain was that he didn't feel entirely like himself. He felt as though a part of him was missing. He shuddered as he corrected himself. He felt as though several parts of him were missing. He couldn't be certain, but he believed his wand was aware of it too. Oh, it worked for him just as well as it always had, but it was as though there was the briefest of hesitation when he was performing magic, as though the wand needed time to recognize the master that held it. This was the reason he had sought out Ollivander in the first place. There were few others that were held in such esteem when it came to Wandler, and it was he that had crafted his own. If his wand was malfunctioning, it would be he that held the answers. Lord Voldemort had his suspicions of what the issue could be, but he wanted to eliminate any other possibility before confronting that issue. Such thoughts took him back to a few days after the wand maker had been retrieved, and the conversation that had been shared between them. Flashback. The Dark Lord was still in a rage at how many men his foray into Diagon Alley had cost him. Usually such a thing would bother him little, but his position was precarious. Since Potter had been elected minister and all but nullified his network of spies, recruiters and key people in positions to assist the movement, those joining him had all but come to a standstill. He'd wanted nothing more than to kill the man as he laid eyes upon him amongst the Aurors, and even more so his son and the fool. Dumbledore as they had arrived. He would not have hesitated had he felt he would prevail. His current condition, however, had raised doubts that he could handle all three at once. Had he not been disposed of for well over a decade, such doubts would not have crossed his mind and the trio would be dead. His reverie was interrupted by a gentle tapping on his door. It opened to reveal a middle-aged man charged with the day-to-day care of the Death Eaters, and more recently, the Wand Maker. "My lord," the man greeted with a bow, "Ollivander is awake." "Then bring him in," Voldemort ordered, dismissing the former healer with an irritated wave. He took a seat behind the desk and waited until he heard approaching footsteps, one set more labored than the other. "Leave us," he commanded once more when the duo arrived, the man that had provided his wand looking considerably older and worse for wear than when they had first met. "I do not suppose you remember me." The wand-maker coughed before composing himself. "Tom Riddle," he croaked. "I told you upon your first visit to my shop that you could be great." Voldemort smirked slightly at the curious man. Even the professors that had spent years in his company had not been so astute. Other than Dumbledore. "Have I not become so?" he asked. "You have," Ollivander agreed, "just not in the way I hoped." The smirk of the Dark Lord vanished as he stood, reveling in the flinch the simple gesture elicited in the man before him. "Your opinion on what I have achieved matters not," he hissed gently. "You are here because I have need of you. For now you are no enemy of mine. It would be in your best interest to keep it that way." Ollivander nodded. "Then how is it I may serve you?" "I need nothing from you other than for you to check my wand, the very same one you gave me so many years ago." "Of course," Ollivander agreed. "What appears to be the problem? There appears to be what I can only describe, a hesitation from it when in use. I would like you to tell me why." The wand maker said nothing but held his hand out expectantly. Reluctantly, the Dark Lord handed it to the man, trusting him to not do anything foolish. The Ollivanders had never chosen sides in any conflict, and he hoped that were to remain. He looked on as the man placed the wand to his ear, felt along the shaft of the wood and hummed to himself in appreciation. "The wand is in excellent condition, particularly for its age. There appears to be no damage internally or externally. You have cared for it well." "Then why the problem?" Voldemort bit back. Ollivander sighed as he shook his head. "It could be a number of things. Your magic may have changed significantly over the years, or," he coughed again, this time out of nervousness before schooling his features. "Or you have dabbled in magic that has changed things about you. Ritualistic magic can have a detrimental effect on a relationship between a wizard and his wand." The Dark Lord's heart sunk as he snatched his wand back from the man. His wand was the one thing he had always been able to rely on, but no longer. The ominous words of the man rung in his ears as he contemplated all the things he had done on his path to greatness and immortality. "What can be done about it?" he asked after pondering his predicament for a while. "A new wand may be necessary," Ollivander answered, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "Other than that, I am at a loss as to how it can be helped. However, I must warn you that there is no promise that even a new wand will work, and certainly not as well as the one you have bonded with over so many decades. My advice would be to find a way to undo some of what you have done, if it is possible." The Dark Lord frowned. His wand had responded well to the rituals he had undertaken to improve his physical abilities during his younger years. Even with the creation of his Horcruxes, the wand had not once skipped a beat, not until he had been resurrected. Was it possible that the failed attempt at creating a Horcrux had proven to be a step too far? Had the night he attacked the Potters changed him just that bit too much? "What of the soul and the relationship to a wand? How significant is it?" he questioned. The man frowned as he thought on what he had been asked and nodded almost satisfactorily after a few moments. "I would not pretend to be well versed in such magic, but the soul is the very essence of a being, both man and creature alike. If a soul were to be damaged, there is quite the chance it would affect the relationship between a man and his wand. Two bonded beings, one remaining whole and the other not, the balance no longer exists." Voldemort nodded his understanding. It was not the news he wanted. "Then I need you to craft me a new one. If your efforts prove to be successful, you will be released with only your memories modified." "Very well," Ollivander agreed. "I will require the contents of my shop." End flashback. The wand maker had spent weeks crafting wand upon wand for the Dark Lord, eventually creating one that somewhat resembled what his own once had, though it was not perfect, far from it in truth. Ollivander had been proven correct in his assumption that he would not bond so well with another wand. Even venom taken from his own familiar had done little to remedy the issue. The failures of the past months are what had him staring at his reflection. Having contemplated the warnings about ritualistic magic from the wand maker, he had made a decision. His own wand was the only one that would work for him as it should, and for that to happen he knew he would have to make a sacrifice. Ever since their conversation, he had perused tome after tome from his and the Malfoy library for answers in case of this eventuality. Though considerable, the Malfoys held nothing on soul magic, and his own collection was not as complete as he would have liked. However, he believed he had concocted a way to reverse the process of creating a Horcrux, but he would need one of the first he had created. According to his own arithmancy, the more Horcruxes he created, the weaker they became, something he had dismissed as unimportant at first. However, for his newest experiment to have a chance at success, he would need the strongest of his collection. That meant he would need either the diary or the ring, the former the closest to hand. Or so he had believed. Upon mentioning the diary he had charged Lucius with caring for, the man had crumbled, fell to his knees and admitted that it was no longer in his possession. The fool had given it to the Weasley girl during a spat with the family. He learnt the girl had died at Hogwarts and that the Horcrux had not been retrieved. That meant that it could only be in one of two places, within the chamber that the girl allegedly accessed or in the possession of Dumbledore. The latter did not bear thinking about. If the man had become aware of his constructs, he would need to be eliminated before he could divulge that information to any, not that he likely would. The man was as cunning and secretive as he himself, but it was not a risk the Dark Lord was willing to take. Lucius had been punished harshly for his actions. Cursing the ineptitude of the man, the Dark Lord had then attempted to retrieve the ring of his family, only to find it missing, much to his chagrin. Such a thing had confused him, and it could only be concluded that Albus had somehow discovered that one also. Frantically he had searched the cave for the necklace, the only other available to him other than Nagini. Finding that missing also had created a panic within him. Desperately he pondered the others. One was safely in Gringotts, within the Lestrange vault, unobtainable by any other than himself or Bellatrix, and the other within the walls of Hogwarts, in a room that would likely never be found. That, however, did not sit well with him. The location of the cup gave him comfort, but the diadem was in danger and he needed to retrieve it quickly. Thankfully, he had an agent within the castle to do so, and though he was reluctant to trust a Malfoy again, he had no other choice but to do so. He himself could not breach such old wards without alerting Dumbledore, and the man would be ready and waiting for such a thing to occur. No, that would not do. Instead of taking such a risk, Lucius had been tasked with contacting his son to pass on very strict instructions on what he needed to do. So long as the habit of ineptitude was broken, the Dark Lord should have the Horcrux he required soon enough, and when the necessary work was complete, he would be able to retrieve the other that remained. Nagini would of course have to be kept safe, no longer allowed to roam freely, but it was a necessary sacrifice if he were to be as powerful as he had once been, and what remained of his most precious creations, safe once more. Break. So that is all you have to tell me, Lucius. I must say I'm disappointed. The man wheezed as he pushed himself onto his knees, the onslaught of curses he had suffered having taken their toll. It had been a methodical breaking down of his mind, body, and spirit before he had given up what little he had been made privy to, but he had eventually succumbed. I have fallen far from grace, Black. Need I remind you of my own failings this past year? Harry shook his head as he grinned malevolently. No, your failings are because of your own choices. I, however, am going to give you one chance at redemption, and it will be Draco's life that depends on it. Lucius tried to push himself to his feet in panic, but fell back to his knees, panting. I can't, he pleaded. He will kill me. Harry shrugged, uncaringly. If you don't, I will kill your son and ensure the Malfoy line is brought to an end. He felt no guilt for the plight of the man. The life he had chosen to lead, the corruption, the supporting of Tom and all his other misdeeds had led him to this point. It was never going to end well for Lucius Malfoy. There was only one thing left for Harry to exploit, his pride in his family name. Lucius would not risk the survival of his line, not even for the Dark Lord. What is it I must do? He sighed, defeatedly. Break. It was a downtrodden Lucius Malfoy that returned to his lavish home, the realization that he ultimately had to choose between his own life or that of his son's weighing him down. There was simply no way that both would survive what was to come. Black and the Dark Lord had seen to that. Reaching his temporary rooms, he poured himself a generous measure of scotch and washed it down with a pain reliever to see him through the next encounter with his master. Before exiting, he straightened his robes and fixed his disheveled appearance in the mirror. Physically, he appeared to be no worse for wear than when he had left only a few hours prior. But in this case, looks were deceiving. Black had broken him down systematically, the same way the Dark Lord had on many occasions. The difference being, the younger of the pair had offered him a reprieve, just not one he was relishing. Though he had escaped the encounter, it would truly have been a mercy to kill him. He would have much preferred that than the undoubtedly fatal task he had been given. Had he refused, however, he had no reason to believe that Black would not kill Draco. One thing he had learnt of them very early in life was that their word was as good as the gold his own family was known for. He smashed his fist against the table the mirror rested on before turning sharply and exiting the room. Making his way through the halls of his home, it was plain to see how far he had fallen. His wealth was gone, the wards no longer under his control, and the fate of his son in the hands of a family that loathed him. Nothing had gone right for him, and if he did not remedy it soon, it would not only be his son, but the entire Malfoy family left in ruin. Reaching the quarters that by rights should be his own, he knocked and waited to be bid entry, his legs still unsteady despite the pain momentarily being gone. "Enter?" the voice of his master instructed. Lucius did so and bowed respectfully in front of the man as expected. "My lord," he greeted, "I have given Draco the instructions and he has assured me that it will be done. It may take a few days as security is tight within the castle." Voldemort nodded distractedly. "Very well, Lucius. It will take a few days to prepare. See to it that Draco is successful, and not a word to Severus. If I wished for him to be involved, I would have given him this task." "Of course, my lord," Lucius complied before taking his leave. The Dark Lord paid the man no heed, so lost in his own thoughts. The worry of his Horcruxes plagued him so. It would have been much easier to have Severus retrieve the diadem, but it was another risk he would not take. The man knew nothing of his creations, and he wanted to keep it that way. His knowledge of the dark arts was perhaps only second to his own, and if anyone were to be able to recognize a Horcrux, it would be Severus Snape. He had no reason to doubt the man's loyalty other than the considerable amount of time he had spent around Dumbledore. However, his skill in the mind arts was exceptional, likely to match his own. Though he had proven himself time and again to be of great assistance, he could never fully trust one so versed in such magic. "Hunt, Nagini, eat your fill. You must be kept safe from now on," he hissed. He watched the serpent slither away fondly before turning his attention to his task. He knew not the difficulty of what he faced or how long it would take to recover, but it had proven to be necessary. With a significant piece of his souls reunited, his wand would once again be as it had, and Potter and Dumbledore could be dealt with once and for all, paving the way for his inevitable triumph over Wizarding Britain. Break. Leo watched with bated breath, his eyes firmly on Katie's right hand. It could have merely been a trick of the light or his sleep-deprived brain, but he was almost certain that he had seen a twitch in one of her fingers. His watching continued as he silently encouraged her, hoping beyond hope that he had not been fooled. It was not a further twitching of the finger that gave him the next indication she was waking, but a deep inhale from the girl that pulled her waiting parents from their thoughts. "Katie," her mother whispered as she approached the bed and began gently caressing the dark hair away from her eyes. With a little more gentle pressing, they fluttered open and darted around confusedly. "How are you feeling?" Sarah questioned. "Tired," Katie answered breathily. "What happened?" "You were cursed, little one," Robert interjected. "What is the last thing you remember?" Katie shook her head and swallowed. "I went to the toilet in the Three Broomsticks, and then I woke up here." A tear silently escaped her, and all Leo could do was squeeze her hand softly. She turned and offered him a watery smile, squeezing back as best she could. "I must look a state," she muttered embarrassedly. "No, lass. Just as beautiful as ever," he croaked, his voice hoarse from lack of use. "I'll find out who did this. Mark my words, they won't get away with it." Katie shook her head. "No, please just leave it. I don't want you to get into more trouble." Before he could argue, Robert shot him a warning look as he shook his head. Listen to her, boy. I will not have you putting her life in danger anymore. If you can't let this go, then you'd better leave and not come back. Hasn't she already suffered enough? Leo looked between the father and daughter, every instinct that had been drilled into him screaming for him to defy the man and not respect the wishes of the girl. Meeting her gaze, however, he couldn't do such a thing. You're more important to me than that, he sighed. Katie offered him a weak smile as her father nodded approvingly. Good. Now go home and get yourself cleaned up. You look as though it has you that has been cursed, the man chastised. We will stay with her. Leo nodded gratefully and kissed the girl on the forehead, who wrinkled her nose. Ugh, you smell worse than me after Quidditch training, she complained. Now you know what I have to put up with, he quipped as he took his leave. He felt lighter than he had in days. Most of his worries lifted with Katie's waking. Passing the reception desk on his way to the exit, he notified the woman of the latest development before stepping into Muggle London and apparating back to Grimmauld Place. There was little more he wanted right now than a good meal, a shower and perhaps some sleep. It had been days since he'd had any of the three. His first stop when he arrived was the bathroom. Whilst there, he cleaned off the accumulated grime of the past days before dressing and heading to the kitchen. It was when he was seated at the table with a sizable plate of eggs and bacon that Harry arrived. She's awake, he announced happily. Good, Harry answered, pleased for the boy. I have an update for you. I just need you to promise me that you will let me handle it for now. Leo nodded. Malfoy, Harry huffed. Draco has been given a rather impossible task and Katie got caught up in it. How did you find out? Lucius. I came across him in Hogsmeade, and he told me everything. Now he is the one with the impossible task. If all goes well, both will be dead within the week. Leo shook his head in confusion. Nah, Lucius wouldn't do something for nothing, he denied. I promised that I wouldn't kill his son if he does as he's told. He held up a hand as Leo was about to protest. I didn't promise that I would save the boy if needed. Chances are that the idiot will get himself killed. And if he doesn't, then he's all yours, Harry shrugged. Leo muttered under his breath, incoherently. I promised I wouldn't, he admitted to a curious Harry. I promised Katie I would leave it. Harry raised an eyebrow in surprise. Come off it. If Tonks told you to do the same, you would. Harry frowned but nodded. She wouldn't. She wouldn't ask me to choose between her and killing him. She's more likely to bloody help you, Leo chuckled before sobering. Katie isn't like us, nor Tonks. She's a damned good Quidditch player, but she's no fighter, lad. Maybe she is exactly what you need, Harry replied with a warm smile. Someone to keep me calm and not act the idiot. Harry laughed as he made his way towards the door.